seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay up. Oh my God! 30, no 10, touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Oh my God! No way! Ah! What a miracle finish!
Well, hey, it's that time of day. The State of Purple podcast back. It is Tuesday afternoon. I am AJ Mansour. That's Jack Day. We are the hosts of the State of Purple podcast, KFAN's Minnesota Vikings podcast, weekly podcast. Time for overreactions and reactions. Jack, we got a lot of that today, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a busy couple of weeks, but we're getting a lot closer. I want to say real football is back, and I don't think the performance on Saturday is quite warranted for the words real football, but I'm pumped up for football. I know you're excited for football. I've been doing a best ball fantasy draft, at least one before bed every single night. So I am ready to go to get into the actual real football of the regular season here in a couple weeks.
Well, you may have to explain the best ball. I hear that term all the time. We'll get to that later. Real quick, though, I want to remind everybody, because if you're watching this live streamed on all the KFAN social media channels, this is an interactive chat. We do this each week. So if you have any comments on this last preseason game, the cuts that were made these last couple of days, what you're looking forward to in preseason game number 2, or just your thoughts and prospects for the Minnesota Vikings this season, feel free to throw it in the comment section. We'll pull it on the screen right down here. You'll be part of the show, part of the conversation as we continue to break down what has happened and what will happen with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Jack, the first thing, let's just get this out of the way right away. We've mentioned it, you mentioned it, I mentioned it. The situation surrounding the Minnesota Vikings preseason game number 1. It was a 33-6 loss to a team that the Vikings had practiced against for 2 or 3 days prior to that. Everyone's disappointed. Everyone's frustrated. Give me your initial thoughts and maybe 1 or 2 things that you can positively pull from that game if you're able to find anything.
I think one of the bigger positive things is actually how negative the game was. I feel like Mike Zimmer has kind of been known for being a preseason wizard, if you will. When he first got here, he didn't like losing in the preseason. And I think the team kind of gets into the regular season, and every single year, at least over the last season, it seems like there's 1 or 2 games every year where the Vikings just get slapped in the face by a team that they're supposed to be better than. And I'm not saying it is a preseason game. I know I think there was 33 Vikings players that didn't even dress for this game. So you can't really overreact about that, but I still think it leaves a little bit of that feeling where it's like there's a little bit of a sour taste. Obviously, Zimmer was not happy after the game. He was kind of throwing some of the players under the bus. I know we mentioned that KELLEN MOND wasn't exactly ideal, which I think we'll get to this in a little bit. I don't think KELLEN MOND's performance was the most worrisome from this game. I think one of the things, PFF came out with all their grades, and I think couple of the most worrisome things were Cameron Dantzler had a 30-point-something grade, and Stephen Weatherly, who was competing for that other defensive end spot, also did not have a very strong performance. There were some good performances along the offensive line. I think the 2 highest graded Vikings players on the offensive side of the ball were Mason Cole, who they traded for from Arizona this offseason, and then the rookie Wyatt Davis, who a lot of people had high hopes for heading into the season that he might claim that right guard spot. I think Ali Udoh may have claimed that spot. He didn't. He was one of those 33 players that didn't play, so I don't know if that necessarily means he has officially claimed that spot, but it seems more and more likely that Ali Udoh is going to be slated into that right guard spot week 1. There's a couple other names here. Janarius Robinson and Patrick Jones II both had grades above, I think it was 68, and they were on the higher graded side of the Vikings defense. I don't know if that's going to potentially open up that competition. I think Andre Patterson said that he wanted to give both Weatherly and DJ Wanham the opportunity to play on Saturday because they were kind of in that competition for that starting role. Does that open up now to a Patrick Jones II and Janarius Robinson, the 2 third and fourth round rookies that the Vikings brought in this year? It always seems like they like to ease things for the rookies, and that's why I don't think Wyatt Davis is going to be starting. I don't think either of those DNs are going to be starting. Another disappointment, I think Amir Smith-Marset was a player that a lot of people are excited for. he didn't look great. He didn't look like he was getting a ton of separation. I know Mike Zimmer said a week or two ago that he needs to improve on the special teams side of things. But all in all, it was a 33-6 loss. It wasn't pretty. It is the preseason still, and I know you and I are both looking forward to getting to Saturday against the Colts. It sounds like there might be some more starters playing on Saturday, and I'm looking forward to seeing, again, air quotes, the actual Vikings team on the field against the Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah, no, I mean, preseason's a weird time, right? We talk about the differences in preseason football and regular season football and how much you can really garner from a preseason football game. I kind of feel that same way about PFF and the way that they grade certain positions, right? A lot of the criticism that they'll receive from players and coaches is they don't really know the inside about what's going on. They don't know whether this responsibility was that or this or whose it was. They can kind of see and put a lot of smart inquiry into it. It's not like it's not accurate at all, but there are nuances, especially when it comes to coverage, especially when it comes to offensive line. So when you see those situations, those either high scores or those low scores, I always take it with a grain of salt, and I take that grain of salt and I look to see if I can compare it to what the coaches are saying as well. So, there is room for improvement all the way, but if there's a low PFF grading plus the coaches are ripping you, then there's something there because the coaches know what the plan was. They know what they were supposed to be doing. That's kind of how you feel with the whole preseason, right? The coaches know what they're working on, what the play call was, what the broken play should have been, and where it was, supposed to be focused, and what they're working on at this point in the preseason. There are other positions where you can very clearly see when somebody's not playing well. You mentioned Amir Smith-Marset. Separation, hard to really tell. You can see some of the nuance there. Is he running right routes or wrong routes? That we don't know. But when you drop the football, that's pretty blatant. We can tell that that you're struggling for whatever reason there. Another thing that we can see and read a little bit between is the quarterback play. If you're misreading something, maybe we don't know that because we don't know what your reads were. We don't know where you were supposed to go, ABC, 1, 2, 3, whatever. But if you're having very bad throws, if you're not getting the ball out of the pocket in time, that led to some concern for me. Not necessarily with KELLEN MOND, right? The KELLEN MOND situation, we'll get to that next. That's a weird deal. I have some comments on that. I'm sure you do too. But there, Travis was in the chat right here. Let me throw this up here real quick. He says, I thought Saturday was a chance for Browning to lock up that backup quarterback spot. He thinks it's maybe back to an open competition now. I think I would agree with this. This is a weird situation where Nate Stanley was not on the available roster for Saturday. I don't know what that means, right? We kind of thought when the whole COVID thing popped up and Browning was the only one, I think, that was vaccinated that we could tell, that might be the difference between him getting that job and Nate Stanley getting the backup job, assuming that they're going to keep one of those two in addition to KELLEN MOND. Browning didn't really do himself any favors. Obviously, there was the pick six, but even beyond that, he didn't do anything to really turn heads. And in fairness, it was against the number ones, but if we ever see Browning in the regular season, it's going to be against number one. So how do you feel about that backup quarterback position, not having seen anything from Nate Stanley yet?
Yeah, I actually had that written down. That was a talking point of mine, is I think this backup quarterback position is now wide open. I think Jake Browning was kind of given that QB2 spot because, like you said, he was the only quarterback practicing for a few days. But what we saw out of Jake Browning and KELLEN MOND, I know it was the 9th overall pick, and Patrick Surtain, I think, that had that pick 6 off of Browning. I don't know if the playbook is fully open for either of them, but I think we saw potentially with Jake Browning, I don't know if you're going to have a high ceiling with a guy like Jake Browning. I get very, and they might not be similar players at all, but I get very like Sean Mannion type vibes from Jake Browning. I don't know if the Vikings, if Kirk Cousins gets hurt and Jake Browning takes over that offense, I think you can almost chalk the season up as a loss. We don't know what the answer is with KELLEN MOND yet. I think we saw some exciting things out of KELLEN MOND. I know there was a couple instances where he got the happy feet going, and that was something that people have said about Kirk Cousins too. But when Kirk Cousins kind of gets the happy feet, it seems like he's more likely to get sacked. KELLEN MOND was making plays with his legs. He was getting outside of the pocket, and the Vikings haven't had that in 3-4 years now with Kirk Cousins. I know that's something that he is working on getting better at. He's said that several times in this offseason. He's playing with a little bit more fire. That's something I said after my kind of the one day I was out at training camp and wrote about that. It seems like this is a different Kirk Cousins. But Kellen Mond has always had the aspect of his game where he can kind of get outside of the pocket and make something happen off script. Kirk Cousins is not known for that. That's something that he has never been known for, and it brings me back to what we had in 2017. Sam Bradford, very talented quarterback in terms of accuracy and arm strength, but he was a statue in the pocket. When Case Keenum took the field, he was mobile and more of a gunslinger. I want to say he was more careless with the football, but that more often than not turned out to be a good thing for the Vikings, that 2017 team. I think Kellen Mond now has a chance. If he can go out and perform well against the Colts and then have a good performance against the Chiefs in their third and final preseason game, I think he has a legitimate chance now at claiming that QB2 spot ahead of the regular season. And if you would have asked me that a week or two ago, I don't think I would have said the same thing.
Yeah, well, we'll use that as a great transition point to talk more about Kellen Mond. I think that it was a telling situation, right? Mike Zimmer's up there ripping Kellen Mond. Basically, saying that he's playing in slow motion, that he's not acting quick enough, he's not doing the things probably that they expected him to do. And it didn't really sound necessarily like that was the outcome or the result of having missed so many days of practice. Like, they thought that maybe that should be the case, and everyone learns differently, and maybe the more comfortability and understanding of that offense will allow him to think less and act quicker and do those things. But I think you're right. When you're talking about roster spots and the availability and maybe to keep an extra offensive lineman or the depth kind of defensive cornerback, whatever you might be looking for, the opportunity to not carry three quarterbacks might be an appealing thing for this team. And if Jake Browning doesn't go out and step up and show anything, if Nate Stanley doesn't go up and show anything, that they're going to be the guys to do that. I think that Kellen Mond might just be the one there. Minnesota fans have this mindset of a backup quarterback coming in and continuing the success of a team. We saw it with Brad Johnson, Randall Cunningham. You mentioned Case Keenum. Those situations that weren't necessarily planned, but those guys stepped into that role, turned it into starting positions for the years going ahead, but also turned it into playoff teams for those football teams. That's what we're expecting, and that usually is not what teams expect from a backup quarterback. But when you look at Kellen Mond, when we don't know much about him in the NFL, Nate Stanley, which we don't know much about him in the NFL, and Jake Browning, when you look at it the way we see it right now, if Kirk Cousins were to go down for a short period of time, not the full season, but 2 games, which one of those 3 players gives you the best chance to win maybe one of those 2 games that Kirk misses and continue to be in the playoff race? I think that people are starting to think that it would be more Kellen Mond than those other guys. So that just changes the perspective there. Now, the one thing I do want to talk to you about, it's been talked about on this radio station for a couple of days now. Kellen got in there. I think there was 46 offensive plays that he ran. Of those 46 plays, I think 30 of them were rushing plays. Not necessarily handoffs. Some of them might have been broken plays or designed runs for Kellen. But 30 plays of his 46 ended up being running plays. The idea and the frustration that we have been hearing is that when you have a quarterback that you may need to rely on as your backup, that you want to see what he's doing, you invested a 3rd-round pick in him. What's the point in handing the ball to A.J. Rose Jr., your 5th-string running back? He's not going to be on this team, not even as a special teamer. He literally is there because he was the only body that was available for this game. Why do you hand the ball off to him 25 times rather than push Kellen Mond a little bit to see what he can do? Even if he doesn't know the playbook, have him do some things that are different. Have him do the simple plays. Do you follow suit with that frustration, or do you think everybody's overreacting a little bit and Mond just needs to learn the offense more and then they'll give him more of the reins?
I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I think Mike Zimmer and the Vikings tend to want to roll out a more vanilla offense in the preseason. But having said that, every single playbook in the NFL has streaks and deep posts and something that would allow Vikings fans that, by the way, were at US Bank Stadium and paid money to see this game. Even the fourth and goal where they brought Greg Joseph out to kick the field goal. It was less than an extra point.
Right.
The game was already out of reach. It's a preseason game. Why do you not put Kellen Mond in a situation where, hey, the game's on the line. We need 6 here, not 3, and let him try to throw a fade in the end zone to I can't say his name today, Amir Smith-Marset, or one of those big tight ends. Zach Davidson is another name. There's players that I think the fans deserve to see more of, and I think people like you and I wanted to see more of. And Kellen Mond is near the top of that list. I wanted to see his arm strength. You really didn't get to see that. Yes, we got to see some of the mobility, but that was because of broken plays. I would hope in the second preseason game, I know that Michael Pierce was talking today, and he said that he is going to be playing. So I think some of the starters are going to be playing, and maybe that pushes some time back into the third and fourth quarter for Kellen Mond if Jake Browning is still QB2 in their eyes. But I want to see them let it loose a little bit more with Kellen Mond. Let him sling the ball. Let him take some shots downfield instead of doing what you just said, handing the ball off and dink and dunking down the field. I think Kellen Mond can manage a football game well enough where he can throw slant routes and hand the ball off. Let's see what he can do when you open the offense up and kind of – I'm not saying it needs to be an air raid offense because that's not what the Vikings are. It's not what they're ever going to be under Mike Zimmer. But at least open up some of the play actions and just let him get out in space and sling the ball downfield.
Well, and if Kellen Mond is going to be a dual-threat quarterback, you have to establish the threat of the pass, right? Again, we're talking preseason here. But if you really want to see what he can do, you have to establish the pass. And if you're not going to pass with him, he's not going to be able to establish it. So even like you mentioned, if it's slants or dig routes, whatever it is, you have to pass it for him to really showcase what he might be able to do in a scramble or in a designed run or whatever that might be. Now, real quick before we move on from this subject, David in the chat wants to know if you have any thoughts on A.J. Rose. We mentioned he's the fifth-string guy. He's behind Cook, behind Madison, Amir Abdullah, Kene Wangu. Do you have any thoughts? Do you think there's even a chance that he has a special teams role on this team?
I think it's unlikely. I think maybe practice squad potentially if no one scoops him up. But Delvin Cook, Alexander Madison, and C.J. Ham are all shoo-ins for this roster. That's three running backs. I know C.J. Ham is technically a fullback, but that's the group that he gets put into. And then Amir Abdullah didn't have an awful game, and he has shown over the last several seasons. He's kind of been a name where people are like, Amir Abdullah has to get cut this year, and he managed to find his way on the roster spot. And I think that comes down to his special teams ability. He's been able to return. He can be a gunner. And then they go out and draft Nwangu, who is one of the most athletically gifted players to come out of the draft in the last several years. I don't think there's a spot for Rose on the roster, at least in week one. If injuries happen, maybe they get him on the practice squad, but if they put him on the practice squad, there's a chance he could get scooped up by another team if he continues to have a solid preseason.
And he got 100 yards, but he was also handed the ball 25 times. So,
correct.
A 4-yard average. That's good. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it wasn't like great. He didn't turn heads as far as even the statistics. You do see 100 yards, and you kind of think that's cool. Congratulations there. But at the same time, we got to remember that it's a preseason game. He was also playing against 3s and 4s, so that factors in as well. So we'll move on to the next subject here. Obviously, another thing we learned from the preseason game is that the Vikings might have a punting problem. Mike Zimmer was very critical of Britton Colquitt in the post-game press conference, and his comments since then, basically saying that 3 of Britton's 4 punts were very poor and that there is cause for concern surrounding this position. They did bring in an Australian-born punter. His name is Max Duffy to work out. That report sounds like they were looking more for future considerations, but anytime you bring in a punter at this stage in the game, it's not a good thing. Is there real concern when it comes to the punting game and Britton Colquitt?
I think this is everyone in Minnesota's favorite thing to talk about is the Minnesota Vikings special teams unit. But I think there's cause for concern. That's exactly the words that came out of Mike Zimmer's mouth, is he had cause for concern. And Will Ragetz, Sports Illustrated reporter for the Vikings, had something up there. I think he averaged like 42 yards per punt, but 3 of the 4 netted in the air. They traveled in the air under 40 yards, which is not very good. I think the worst league average last year was I think he said it was like 42 yards or something like that. So he was actually like 2 or 3 yards under the league average from a year ago, which is absolutely atrocious. He also tweeted out that the guy that they had in for a workout had a funny thing when he punted at Kentucky, and there was a play where it was a broken play where it should have been blocked, and he completely deked a defender out of his shoes, which a punter isn't supposed to be able to do that. But that brings me to my next point, and I don't know if this is realistic or if he's strictly a tight end, but the Vikings drafted a tight end in the 5th round this year by the name of Zach Davidson, who also held punting duties at his Division II school that he played for. So that could be another option for this team if Colquitt continues to struggle, but he's a veteran, and I like to believe that I think he's going to get it figured out and turned around. But if he has another performance against the Colts on Saturday night like he did against Denver, I think you're going to hear some more negative comments out of Mike Zimmer, and I think it's going to get even uglier.
Yeah, if he has another bad week, there's going to be a lot of calls for his head. You mentioned one option in-house. Can I throw another name at you from outside of the organization right now? It's a name that is familiar to Minnesota Vikings fans. And I'm grasping at straws here because there aren't a ton of options, right? I mean, they bring in a guy, Max Duffy, doesn't have a ton of experience. The only other free agent options that are even like considered, one of them, Dustin Colquitt, Britton's older brother, which that's awkward. Like, I don't know if that's the good situation there. He's punted for Kansas City forever, 15, 16 years in the league. I think he's on the downside of a career that's probably about to retire. I don't think that that's a real option. The one I do think is potentially an option if Colquitt throws another stinker out there this week, and he appears to still be attempting to stay in the league, is Thomas Morstead. Do you know that name?
It sounds familiar. Is that the Saints punter?
That is the Saints punter. Thomas Morstead, most Vikings fans will know him as the classy guy who came out of the locker room after the Minneapolis Miracle and took the snap, the extra point snap, so they could finish the game. At that point, that was required for them to do. All the Saints players had walked off the field, weren't coming out of the locker room. He led a small cohort out there to finish that game. That classiness led to Vikings fans linking up with Thomas Morstead and donating more than $200,000 to Morstead's charity that supports children with serious illnesses. Really cool story back then. Morstead played, I think, 12 years with the New Orleans Saints. Didn't have a bad season last year. More likely was the casualty of a bad salary cap situation in New Orleans and their shift to a younger organization, younger, cheaper players that can come in and fill that role. Morstead was most recently, just 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, actually, attending the John Carney Combine. John Carney, longtime kicker in the NFL, the 5th overall highest scoring player in NFL history, played for many teams. But that name, if anyone plays fantasy football, you're familiar with it. But Carney holds a specialist combine where it's just for specialists. And at this combine just a couple weeks ago, Morstead was punting. He put his tape out on his social media. You can go find it on his Twitter right now. He highlighted 3 punts up the middle, 3 to the left, and 3 to the right, and put his average there. Now, situationally, you have to remember we don't know what those situations were. It could have been backed up way in his own zone, and he was booming the punt. Didn't have to worry about out-kicking his coverage. Didn't have to worry about pinning them inside the red zone or touchbacks or any of that. But his average that he posted was a 4.88 second hang time and 58-yard average punt. On paper, that sounds great. Again, situationally, we don't know that. But he really is the only other option that has any experience out there if Britton Colquitt goes out and throws a stinker. So just a kind of fun, cool tie-in story of a potential option if Colquitt goes out there and doesn't do well this next weekend against the Colts. But there's also the possibility that Mike Zimmer is just trying to motivate someone through the press. Wouldn't put it past him. We've seen him do that before, especially with special teamers. Now, we move on to another facet, I guess, of these special teams, the weird nature of the kicking battle. Patterson was waived, injured reserve, a weird situation. You mentioned Will Ragazza, Sports Illustrated Vikings reporter. He kind of highlighted this situation as well, where Patterson was injured for a while, came back for that Saturday practice at US Bank Stadium, looked great, was kicking seemingly with no issues. And then we were told that he was going to actually kick this second preseason game with Joseph kicking in the first. And before we even got that opportunity, he was waived, put on injured reserve. There's questions on whether they're trying to stow him away for his benefit, for their benefit, whatever that is. But this is just a weird situation. Do you think that Joseph actually won this kicking job?
I don't know. Weird is a good way to put it, because I think throughout camp, there were days where it was like, I'd see, I think it's Eric Smith was one of the team reporters. He'd say, right, Joseph just went 4 for 4 or 5 for 5, finishing with a 53-yard make. And then there are other days where it's like Joseph just went 1 for 5 and missed 4 field goals or missed 3 field goals. So it never really felt like Joseph went out and claimed that position. And I was looking forward to seeing Riley Patterson kick on Saturday, because like you said, it's a really weird situation where I don't feel like he went out and outrightly grabbed that position, and it's up for the taking still. But now there's no competition. I feel like once Riley Patterson came back, right, Joseph started to kick the ball better. Does he get back into a little role in his head where he's like, hey, there's no competition. He starts missing kicks again. I guess we'll see on Saturday, but it's definitely something to watch. Like I said at the beginning of this segment, special teams is not my favorite thing to talk about. It's not anyone in Minnesota's. If we don't have to talk about special teams, that's usually a good thing, but I don't know if that's going to be the case ahead of this 2021 season.
All right, Jack, we're going to close out with one final topic. Looking forward to preseason game number 2. You mentioned it earlier. It sounds like we're going to get our eyes on more starters. I don't think we're going to see everybody. I don't think we'll see Anthony Barr, Justin Jefferson, Daniil Hunter, probably not Dalvin Cook. You know, these situations where guys that either are still dealing with recovery, Anthony Barr has some weird situation going on, Daniil Hunter may or may not need to get out there. But we'll probably see some of them. Michael Pierce today said that he fully expects to play. I'm excited to see that defense. I'm excited to see Patrick Peterson. Curious to see what they look like. What are some things that you're looking forward to in preseason game number 2? Probably the game, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, if it was when I was on with Tenna. This is probably the preseason game number 3 that we used to call where you saw the starters. I don't think that we're going to see them in that preseason game number 3 now that that's the final preseason game. So this might be our only look at Kirk. It might be our only look at, some of that defense that we're looking at bouncing back. What are you excited to see? What do you want to see? And what will make you feel comfort, I guess, going into the regular season if you see it on Saturday night against the Colts?
There are a few things that I'm excited for. I think starting with Michael Pierce. I think a lot of Vikings fans are excited to see him officially take the field. Obviously, he opted out last year with COVID protocols. He's back this year, he was battling an injury throughout camp, and he was excited. I don't know if you saw the picture. One of the team reporters tweeted out this morning. He had a big smile on his face, and they said, I don't think I've ever seen a veteran this excited to play in a preseason game. So that's good. And he is a big dude. That picture that I saw today, like his legs and just his stature is like, okay, he is even bigger. And I've seen him not up and close, but I've seen him in person. I was like in the pictures, like, okay, he looks huge. But a couple other positions, a name you just mentioned, Patrick Peterson and Bashaud Breeland, I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Cameron Dantzler did not have a great performance by any means. I know Chris Boyd, he was one name that I forgot to mention. Chris Boyd was one of the higher rated PFF players, according to PFF and their grading system. But I'm excited to see Patrick Peterson and Bashaud Breeland get out there. And that defensive end spot, it seems like it's even more wide open now after Weatherly had a lackluster performance. And some of the rookies are kind of, I don't know if they've necessarily jumped any spots on the depth chart, but they looked solid. Again, it was against third and fourth string players instead of first and second string, which Weatherly was probably going against. But it's exciting to see all of the young talent. And at the very least, at least they're going to push DJ Wanham and Weatherly to hopefully be better on Saturday. And then the last two positions are on the offensive side of the ball. We already covered this, so I don't need to go into too much detail, but I'm really excited to see how Kellen Mond performs and how Jake Browning performs, because if Browning has another performance like he did on Saturday and Mond even takes a little stride forward, I think he's going to close that gap and maybe even jump Browning on the depth chart. One other player I'm going to call out and I want to see have a better performance is someone I also talked about is Amir Smith-Marset. He needs to go out and take advantage of these reps because the Vikings are very top heavy at the wide receiver position. Obviously, they have Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. KJ Osborne had a couple catches on Saturday, and I think he's kind of cementing himself into that wide receiver 3 role. But after him, it's up for grabs. And if he has another lackluster performance, there's a possibility that even an undrafted guy could jump him on the depth chart if he struggles. I think with his speed, we need to see more separation. I want to see him get a couple more catches, maybe make a bigger impact on special teams. But Smith-Marset has to have a better day against the Colts on Saturday. But I think that's kind of the short version, if you will, of all of the guys that I'm looking forward to in those positional battles that I'm really intrigued to see how they pan out on Saturday and how they pan out the following week, and then who ends up grabbing those starting roles come week 1 against the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, I would look forward to seeing the defense step up a little bit. Obviously, they'll have some starters out there, but they're also taking advantage of a Colts team that has their own situations going on. Quarterback injuries, players that we may not see a whole lot of because they're coming off injury as well. So you have that opportunity there. I'd love to see them step up. I don't care if they win or lose. I do want to see a better performance than we saw last week. So that's what we have to look forward to. Jack, I know you're going to be all over coverage this week as they prepare for that preseason game. We saw some cuts, nothing substantial this week, but they'll continue doing those position rehashes and looking down as they continue to have these different cut dates going forward. So pay attention to KFAN.com for Jack's coverage there. And we'll continue with this podcast next week, another reaction to preseason game number 2. Hopefully it goes a little bit better. And maybe there'll be some big news. Who knows what's going on with this team? As we learned, just when we think that Green Bay's the team that has all the drama and everything going on, they buckle up, goes normal, and the Minnesota Vikings go back to Minnesota Vikings in the style that they always do and always have opportunities to scare us and frustrate us. So, Jack, appreciate your time, man. We'll see everybody next week. This is the State of Purple podcast, KFAN's Minnesota Vikings podcast. You can catch us every Tuesday for an episode recapping the week that was in Minnesota Vikings football. I encourage you and implore you to follow Jack on Twitter. It's at Jack_H_day. You can follow me at AJKFAN. We'll have your latest breaking news on Minnesota Vikings all throughout the week and the weekend and the evenings and the nights. We've got it covered top to bottom because Jack's the man. Breaking news left and right. Who the heck is Jack Day? That's right. He's the co-host of the State of Purple podcast. We'll see everybody next week. Adios.
10 seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop. Steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay